I'm Linda Mossmines, and I'm the Chattanooga and Hamilton County historian. And along with Jim Frierson, who is sitting over here, and Sam Elliott, who is somewhere supposedly making a living, and Greg Martin, we chair the 200th anniversary of Hamilton County's charter. We call it the 200th birthday party. We'll be celebrating on October the 25th at the courthouse with cake for the public. So those of you who like cake, and especially like free cake, that will be a wonderful time at 11 o'clock, which is the actual time and the date in which the charter was signed. We will be celebrating. The celebration itself will actually go on until June of next year, because those of you who know local history know we can't do all of what's significant in Hamilton County in a period of 2 or 3 months. We're thrilled to be here tonight, and part of that reason is because Lookout Valley has been prominent in Hamilton County's history since before it was technically Lookout Valley, when it was Cherokee land, and before there was a Hamilton County. We are at Browns Tavern, and there's always a debate about what is the oldest landmark in Hamilton County. Our research at the state level, looking through the archives, looking at deeds, looking at journal notes and everything, says this is the oldest structure that is original to the county. As a Lookout Valley resident, I kind of like that. Yeah. We have it. We were at Poe's Tavern last Saturday, and the Soddy Daisy folks, the Poe's Crossroads folks, said, well, we're the oldest. And we had to all sort of look at each other and go, but it's not the original building. It was to have the original. So we're excited to have you tonight. If you want to know Lookout Valley history, if you want to know Civil War history, if you want to know Browns Ferry, Browns Tavern, we've got the guy for you, because he is the expert in the area. Not only that, he's really fun, a great speaker, and a good buddy. So, and he's a
I'm an Elder Mountain guy.
He's an Elder Mountain guy.
Raccoon Mountain.
Raccoon. So we'll claim him as being part of the valley. So I'm going to hush, sit down, and let Anthony have control of everything.
All right, Linda, thank you. Well, thank all of y'all for turning out. Man, I'm sort of amazed at the crowd. Linda said, I think the weather certainly helps. I did some progress with the anniversary of the Battle of Chickamauga. Stood in a wool uniform dressed as a surgeon in a Snodgrass cabin at 103 degrees for 2 days.
My David's
Fun sort of wore off after the first hour or two, as you might imagine, at 103 degrees. Now, Linda asked me to come to talk some about Browns Tavern and Browns Ferry, and I really sort of decided to weave that into sort of an early history of Lookout Valley. Geography's always made this valley a natural corridor for travel. Just as sheer geography. As Linda noted, well before historic times, in the days of the prehistoric, in the days of the mound builders, this valley was a natural transportation route. Just the geography. You want to pass through these mountains, you had to cross through Lookout Valley. It's just sort of the way the geography lines up. And that's even made more important just because of the navigational obstacles in the rivers. The river flows around Raccoon Mountain. Of course, you come to the suck, the pot, the pan, the skillet, which all made using the Tennessee River for transportation, particularly when the water is low, very difficult. Of course, TVA has eliminated that. We don't have to worry about the pot and the pan and the suck and all those things too. Now, at roughly the time of the Revolution, as white settlement encroaches into Upper East Tennessee, the northeastern corner of the state. And I say encroaches because it was against King George III's policy for settlers to cross over the mountains and settle in the Indian Territory, but they did that despite what King George they said to them. So in those years before the Revolution, as the Revolution approaches, Lookout Valley will become a refuge for those groups of Cherokees who are opposed to selling land and giving land to the white man. They've come here under the leader called Dragging Canoe. He's very much opposed to the white encroachment. In fact, that these men they actually have a purchase of land in Upper East Tennessee. And Dragging Canoe stands before the crowd and he says, you have purchased a beautiful land. but I will ensure that it will be a dark and bloody ground. So his followers will take refuge. They set up a town out on Williams Island. Another nearby town they set up in the Running Water Gorge, which is where just as you get off on I-24, you cross over the Nickajack Bridge coming to Chattanooga, you enter that deep gorge that goes under the big railroad overpass. That's the Running Water Gorge. So some of those towns were set up there, and so really what you have for roughly a 20-year period from the 1770s to the 1790s is a series of settlers versus Indian raids. The Indians, the Chickamauga Cherokee, will leave the Chattanooga area and they'll launch raids on settlements, Virginia, Ohio, Upper East Tennessee. The new settlements at Fort Nash or Nashville over in Middle Tennessee are all subject. The settlers will then launch retaliatory raids. And for 20 years, you roughly have this back and forth raid and counter raid. The settlers will burn the villages on Williams Island, burn the villages down in the gorge at different times. But really by the time we reach the turn of the century, dragging canoe has died. The Cherokee resistance is beginning to lessen, and they petition, the Chickamauga Cherokee petition the larger tribe to take them back in. And so that warfare ends. In fact, by the turn of the century, the Cherokee have really sort of adopted what I would call the settlers' way of living. They're beginning to build cabins, they become farmers, they're starting to weave and sell crafts. And so by 1800, what had been once a vast Cherokee territory had been considerably reduced. We're still in what was considered Cherokee territory. Now this still represented a problem as far as the citizens of the new United States was concerned, because this Cherokee territory represents a physical barrier between the settlements, say at Charleston and Savannah and Augusta, the coast, and the settlements in Upper East Tennessee and at Nashville. Literally, there are very few roads. There are no real roads in the Cherokee territory. There are paths through the Cherokee territory. And so the government wants to get rid of this barrier to development. And so the Cherokee agent for this area was a man named Return J. Meigs. Meigs County's named after him. Rev War veteran that fought it with Benedict Arnold at Quebec, hero of the Revolutionary War. He sends a man named William L. Lively, he's a major in the Army, to Lookout Valley. He sets up he lives over a settlement basically at the mouth of Lookout Creek, where it enters the Tennessee River at the foot of Lookout Mountain, called Brownsville. It's really not much more than a few huts and a blacksmith shop. And so really, and he is the first U.S. government official to come into what is now Hamilton County. And we probably got too many U.S. government officials now, but he's the first. So, as I said, he builds a house. So Meigs and Lively negotiate with the Cherokee to allow roads into this area to connect the white settlements on either side of the Cherokee territory. There's a lot of resistance to this, as you might imagine. Most of the Cherokee are smart enough to figure out more roads equal more white settlers. So there's a lot of opposition. But eventually both Meigs and Lively are able to overcome this opposition. In October of 1805, a treaty is allowed or signed which allows the building of roads in the Cherokee territory. Now, these roads are generally called federal roads, and the Cherokee themselves will actually set up the governance of the roads within their territory. They'll set the toll rates. They'll set the ferry rates. And one of my favorite historians was my old UTC professor and later a friend at the Civil War Roundtable, Jim Livinggood, and he gives a description of these roads, how they ran. The road started at Fort Nash, which is Nashville, on the headwaters of Stones River. From there it crossed the Cumberland Plateau near Mont Eagle, and then down Battle Creek, which is the creek that comes down Mont Eagle Mountain, goes in the river at South Pittsburgh, where it crossed to Nickajack. From that point, two roads were built. One followed the Nickajack Trail to Lookout Mountain Town, today's Trenton, across the mountain there. The other branch led directly through present Chattanooga. Beginning at Nickajack, it went through the Running Water Gorge to the Tavern of John Brown near Lookout Mountain, where it met the trail from the north of Lookout to a spot on. From there, the road wound around the north of Lookout Mountain to the spot on Chattanooga Creek where Daniel Ross had a store and kept a stand for travelers. Then it passed through Ross's Gap in the present Missionary Ridge. The two branches came together somewhere north of the present Dalton, Georgia, and proceeded as a single road to the neighborhood of Van Spring Place. Along the roads, wagons passed from Charleston, Augusta, and Savannah, carrying their merchandise to the Indians and the whites beyond. Great herds of beef cattle, swine, and horses passed down the road on their way to the settled areas near the seacoast, accompanied by the colorful drovers singing their songs on the trail as they guided their product to market under its own power. In the reminiscences of one who knew the road, there is a vivid picture of interesting traffic. And this period account says, enterprising men soon established stands on the road and built good frame houses and clusters of log houses, also stables and stake and rider fence lots. They made provision for the traveling public. At first, most of the travel was on horseback. A strong horse with a good roomy saddle, stirrups at the right length, and going on a foxtrot will easily carry a rider 40 miles a day. Sometimes half a dozen or more people met at one of these stands. They found plenty of good things to eat, and around a wide fireplace, good cheer prevailed. The next thing that came were droves of fine beef cattle from Kentucky and Tennessee, droves of horses and mules, sleek and fat, 100 in a drove. Then the hog droves from 500 to 2,000 in a drove. The hog manager went forward a day or two to engage corn in lots for his hogs. Often there was a purveyor who came in early in the afternoon to stop at the place where they were to spend the night. He commenced cooking for hands that drove the hogs and also prepared a breakfast in the morning. Usually the cooking was done in a little house built for their use. The hallooing of the drivers could be heard from morning till night. One other member of the traveling public was a large wagon drawn by 4 oxen. It was loaded with flour and whiskey. And so these roads that would be built through here, and that's a description of the road just down here in Lookout Valley at the time all that was occurring. That would become basically our equivalent of the interstate highways. Today our produce all goes up and down trucks on the interstate. That's how your produce got to market around 1800. Now John Brown was a mixed blood businessman. He ran a nearby ferry. He was likely a Cherokee volunteer in the Cherokee troops under Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. He was described as the most skilled river pilot in the area. He knew how to negotiate the suck the pot the pan and the skillet. And he was also described as an uncanny horse trader. He's a very difficult man. We got a couple of his descendants here I found out. And at the end, they may be able to tell you more about him than I know. So, by 1819, Brown is running this tavern, and there's a treaty done in 1819 that will cede more land to the Cherokee. Now, prior to 1819, Hamilton County was in Cherokee territory. But the Treaty of 1819, what would become northern Hamilton County, north of the Tennessee River, is actually ceded by the Cherokees in this treaty. Now, later in 1819, after this land is ceded, Hamilton County is formed. So as Linda said, 200th anniversary of the county. Now, to sort of help the Cherokee decide to do this, the government decides to give 640 acres to any prominent Cherokee. And one of the ones, they're sort of greasing the skids would be the way I would put it to get this treaty through. One of the men they give this 640 acres to is John Brown. And his reservation includes the tavern, it included the ferry, it included the land over on Moccasin Bend where he has his house. And he will continue to live there and farms, runs his ferry, runs his tavern until 1830 when he sells this land to William and Ephraim Hickson. And so at that point in 1830, it is believed, and his descendants might be able to elaborate on this, that he went west where some of the early Cherokee had gone, even though the removal does not occur until 8 years later. Now, in 1838, of course, the Cherokee removal comes, and that opens up the southern half of Hamilton County below the Tennessee River to become part of the whole county. And of course, the Cherokee are removed. And so several detachments will leave Ross's Landing, and they will float past Browns Ferry on the Tennessee River in flatboats. But somewhere between 1 and 3 detachments will cross at Browns Ferry, roughly a mile from here, and march right down this road on the Trail of Tears. According to some folks I've talked to who studied it, 3 detachments, the Bell, the Whitley, and the Drain detachments, crosshead the ferry and march down that road to a new home that they don't want to go to. Same road that most of us drive down every day. So, this tavern is a witness to that tragic event of 1838, but it's not the last tragic event that the tavern will witness. We're going to fast forward roughly 30 years to the Civil War. Of course, again, John Brown's gone, and I think essentially this becomes a private residence after the Civil War. I don't know exactly who owned it. I know Jim Ogden's done some work in the land records on how it may have passed. But it is essentially a private residence. But now, September 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1863, the Battle of Chickamauga is fought for possession of Chattanooga. It is an overwhelming Confederate tactical victory. I say tactical because the object of the campaign is to take Chattanooga. The Union Army retreats back into Chattanooga. And that's where then the Confederates will then occupy the high ground, Missionary Ridge, Lookout Mountain, and they will send roughly 500 troops into the most critical spot in the entire Chattanooga area, Lookout Valley. They send 250 members of the 15th Alabama Infantry who will act as pickets from basically the interstate along this chain of hills all the way past the ferry. Now, at any one time, they're in groups of 2s or 3s, scattered down through on these hills. They also send the 4th Alabama Infantry into the valley, but they are placed on the north end of Raccoon or Elder Mountain, and their purpose is to guard the road across the river. So once the Confederates have taken the high ground on Lookout Mountain, and they have some troops in the valley, the Union Army is in a desperate pinch. And the reason they're in a desperate pinch is they are counting on their supplies coming in by the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad. Now that railroad goes south out of Nashville, it goes into North Alabama, where it ties into another railroad at Bridgeport, and it comes in from the west. And when the Confederates leave that area, they burn the bridge at Bridgeport, Alabama. So the farthest the Union Army can get their supplies by train is to Bridgeport, Alabama. Now, it takes 964,000 pounds of food and supplies a day, not counting ammunition, to supply the Union Army that is trapped in Chattanooga. So they decide we can't go through Lookout Valley, so the next thing they try is they throw down a pontoon bridge roughly where the Spring Hill Suites are. They would take their wagons over Stringer's Ridge where the Cherokee Boulevard Tunnel is. They will go to the 19th century equivalent of Signal Mountain Road and out Suck Creek Road with the intent of going out Suck Creek Road into Sequatchie Valley and south to Bridgeport. Well, the Alabama boys, so it's gone from 23, 24 miles to Bridgeport. By that route, it's roughly 40 miles to Bridgeport. With the Alabama boys on the north of the mountain, discover what the Union Army's doing. They have with them sharpshooters armed with this. This is a replica of it, the Whitworth rifle. It is the most accurate rifle of its day. Not only is it rifled, it has a hexagonal bore and fires a hexagonal bullet. This is actually a bullet that was found down on the sides of Raccoon Mountain. Supposedly can hit something over a mile away. So the Confederates up on the mountain left the Union wagon train trying to get to Bridgeport. It's about 3 miles long. They let it get about 2.5, 3 miles up in the gorge. The man with the Whitworth rifle shoots down the lead mules. Then another guy with a Whitworth rifle shoots down the last team of mules. And then the boys with a regular rifle spend the next few days picking off the guys in the middle. In fact, this is a drawing of that event that appeared originally in London Illustrated News, and Harper's Weekly stole the drawing. Raccoon Mountain, Tennessee River, the 19th century equivalent of Suck Creek Road on the far side. Confederates firing into the wagon train across the river. In fact, I'll read you a very brief description of that. This is from one of the men who participated. We had brought our Whitworth rifles from Virginia with us. These were placed down the river on the extreme left to shoot down the front teams, which after being done, the road was entirely blocked. We then proceeded in a leisurely manner to use our English rifles. The road was too narrow between the bluff and the river for the Union teams to turn around or escape in any manner, and they were compelled to stand until all were shot down. I saw one of the Whitworth rifles, an English gun with a globe sight carrying a large ball, a few of which had run the blockade in the hands of one of our sharpshooters, killed 2 mules at one shot, the missile passing through both of their necks. So at this point, the Union Army is forced to use a supply route over Cherokee Boulevard, update the 19th century equivalent of Dayton Boulevard and Mountain Creek Road to Mount Morrison Springs Road, up the W, down the Anderson Pike to Dunlap, and south to Bridgeport. 60 miles. The distance kills 10,000 horses and mules. After roughly a month of this, the Union Army is near starvation. They're down to quarter rations. The Army ration's not great. Quarter rations, you're pretty desperate. So Union General Rosecrans realizes he has to do a plan. He has to come up with some way to make open Lookout Valley to get to Bridgeport and get the supplies in quicker. But before he can implement a plan, he is relieved and Ulysses S. Grant is sent into the area. Now Grant reviews this plan developed by a man named William F. Baldy Smith. And Smith realizes that there are only a few pickets along this chain of hills, probably less than 100 men from the interstate down past the ferry. The main bulk of the Confederates were camped somewhere here in the valley. And so they observed this from Moccasin Bend. In fact, they know that the old Browns Ferry site, there's typically only 2 Confederates there. So, Smith develops a plan where they will build boats, flat-top boats, pontoon-top boats in Chattanooga from existing lumber. They build roughly 50 of these. They place 30 to 40 men in each of these boats. And on the night of October 27th, they get in these boats, and it is literally in the 3 a.m. in the morning when they load up. They get in these boats at Ross's Landing, and they begin to float down the Tennessee River. Now, as they're floating down the Tennessee River, out of the sight of the Confederate pickets at Browns Ferry, huge numbers of Union troops are massing on Moccasin Bend. They're standing there waiting for the critical moment. The Union troops have built a large bonfire on the other side of Moccasin Bend. That is the signal for where the boats are to turn in. Well, the boats turn in out at the old Browns Ferry. A few boats will turn in right here where the marina is, but by and large, most of the effort is down at the old ferry. There's a drawing up here of some of the boats landing. Now, as soon as they land, this is a very specialized operation. One group of men and a couple of the boats are supposed to take the hill on the south side of the gap. Another group is supposed to take the hill on the north side of the gap. And a third group is to build breastworks across the gap. which they immediately start to do. Now, when they land, there are 4 Confederates there. A couple of extra guys have shown up. Needless to say, as hundreds of Union troops are landing, they leave. They come back to the Confederate camp, and the Confederates actually will launch a counterattack in the middle of the night into the gap at Browns Ferry. But there are only 250 Confederates, and they have brief success. They gain the northern hill, but at this point, literally, as these boats land, the boats go across the Moccasin Bend. They start ferrying troops over. Immediately when the Union boats had landed, they start building a pontoon bridge from the ferry across the Moccasin Bend. So by the time the Alabamians all gather off from the far ends of the valley and launch that attack, there are literally thousands of Union troops in the valley. And so even though they have brief success, they're pushed out of Browns Ferry. In fact, they will retreat back to Lookout Mountain. The boys in the 4th Alabama, who've been shooting the wagon trains over on Suck Creek Road, they take off down the side of Elder Mountain. They'll cross far in the southern end of the valley on to Lookout Mountain. At this point, the Union Army has gained a foothold, a beachhead in Lookout Valley. Now, simultaneously as this is happening, what was supposed to happen is troops from the Army of the Potomac, the Army in Virginia, had been sent by railroad. They had laid a pontoon bridge at Bridgeport, and on the morning of the 27th, as the beachhead is established at Browns Ferry, they're supposed to march in up the Walhatchee Pike and down the Browns Ferry Road to here. But they're a day late. They will not come in till the 28th. So, Hooker's troops arrive and he connects with the Browns Ferry bridgehead. He sets up his headquarters on that knoll right there. His other generals, General Church, General Howard, and the Howard High School, everything, set up their headquarters right here in the yard of this tavern. And so at this point, there are literally thousands of Union soldiers in the valley. Now, as Hooker marches in, he leaves one small detachment, roughly 1,200 to 1,500 men, down at the Walhatchee Rail Junction. And they're just left down there by themselves. They're on a farm owned by a family named Rowley. Well, the Confederates realize what's going on. General Bragg and General Longstreet actually go to the western brow of Lookout Mountain and they go out on the Sunset Rock. And Bragg tells Longstreet, I want you to drive the Union troops out of the valley. Well, Longstreet's a good enough general. He's been with Lee for years. He knows that's an impossible task. So he doesn't obey the spirit of the law. He decides to obey the letter of the orders he's just been given. He doesn't attack the main Union position here. He decides to attack the isolated brigade down at the Walhatchee Rail Junction. Now this brigade is led by a man named John Geary. He'd been a former governor of Pennsylvania and a mayor of San Francisco. Quite the individual. So, Longstreet's plan is he will send troops down from Lookout Mountain into the Walhatchee Rail Junction and try to destroy that Yankee detachment. He realizes that Union troops, once the firing starts, will start up the Browns Ferry Road and go to the aid of their comrades. So he places a detachment of Confederates on the hill where the BP station and the interstate cuts through, and another detachment of Confederates on the hill behind McDonald's, that large dome hill. And sure enough, the Confederates at night, night battles are extremely rare in the Civil War. We already had one at Browns Ferry, we're going to have another one at Walhatchee. The Confederates will launch their attack at roughly 2 or 3 in the morning on the Walhatchee Rail Junction. And yet, so immediately from this spot, from these headquarters, Hooker starts to send troops up the road. When they get to the BP station, the Confederates fall on them off that hill. Another group of Union soldiers starts up the road, goes around that fight, and when they reach the area of the hill behind McDonald's, a whole nother little battle breaks out there. So on the night of the 29th, you've got battles going on in 3 little places here in Lookout Valley. But the bottom line is the Confederate attacks are all unsuccessful. It's for its size, it's nowhere near the size of the Battle of Chickamauga, but it's a very aggressive fight. The Confederates got behind the railroad. If you've driven down the Walhatchee Pike, you know how close the railroad is to the road. Well, they're firing from behind the railroad, literally at point-blank range, as close as I am to Susan, into the Union lines. So it was a really bitter fight. This is an unsuccessful fight. The Confederates retreat up on Lookout Mountain. And at that point, Lookout Valley is secure for the Union Army. Once Lookout Valley is secure, the battles for Chattanooga, at least in my mind, and most people study it, are essentially over. Even though we'll still fight on Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, and the reason I say they're essentially over, at this point, the Union Army has an open supply line. They can bring in thousands of reinforcements, which they do. The army that's not only that's Hooker's been coming to the army that has captured Vicksburg and the Sherman comes in the they can get in unlimited supplies. So once Lookout Valley falls, I think Bragg should have retreated, but I wasn't there to tell him what to do. But that's really end of the fighting in Lookout Valley. Now, there will be troop, particularly from all these hillocks, a lot of artillery positions. Some of them you can still find on those hills. We'll fire on the Lookout Mountain during the assault. And then after the fighting, the armies won't fight in the winter. When the battles for Chattanooga end, there's no more fighting until May. The reason they don't fight in the winter, you put an army of 100,000 men on a dirt road and it's raining, they'll sink up to their waist. And after 60,000 have passed, they'll sink up to their shoulder. So they literally build little log huts and spend the winter. And when I was a kid, this area was full of those old hut sites where they built a Covenant transport. It was covered with the hut sites. There is one good picture, General Hooker and his staff. You can see the types of cabins. That picture was taken directly behind the tavern. So that's sort of both the early American history, early Native American history, and the Civil War history of Lookout Valley, sort of briefly told. And Linda asked me to share you some exciting news with you, which I'm going to. I can't tell you everything. But there's a group called, some of you may be familiar with it, called the American Battlefield Trust. Used to be known as the Civil War Trust. Changed its name roughly a year or two ago, because not only is it buying Civil War battlefields, it is buying Revolutionary War and War of 1812 battlefields as well. So it's now known as the American Battlefield Trust. They have recently purchased approximately 20 acres of the Browns Ferry battlefield where the Union troops landed in those boats. They are negotiating for the purchase of this tavern. The money is in place. However, in fact, for roughly 2 years ago, the trust contacted me and told me the money was there, but we have to find someone to take it. Now, here's the exciting news. We found someone to take it. So a local nonprofit, the trust will, the state of Tennessee, the federal government, and the Civil War Trust will provide the funds not only to purchase the tavern, but hopefully more land at Browns Ferry. Eventually, this will pass to a local nonprofit, where at that point we hope it will either possibly go into the national park or become some other type of publicly available space. So there is a plan in place to save both the tavern and ferry. I really don't want to say much more than that because, one, I'm superstitious. This is sort of like a football game. We've driven the ball from our own one to the opponent's one, and it's first and goal. But we don't have that ball in the goal line yet, so I'm not going to celebrate. And the second reason I really don't want to say anymore, when that nonprofit takes this, because it's a huge responsibility to maintain a log building. If that roof goes, that's a $60,000 roof. I want them to be able to say and take the credit and make the announcement themselves. But yes, there is a plan in place to preserve all of this. And hopefully, after the first of next year, we can tell you that plan's been carried out. I was a dentist for 35 years. I've been a active preservationist since I retired. And the one thing I've learned, everything in preservation takes 3 to 4 times as long as they tell you it's gonna take. So that sort of concludes my remarks about both the Tavern Ferry. I'll take questions if anybody has any. Feel free to come up and look at some of the stuff. There's maps, drawings of some of the action in this area. So I appreciate y'all turning out, and I'll turn it back over to Linda.
I do want you all to ask questions. I think you can tell from the way that Anthony has talked that we have a treasure trove of knowledge here. But before we do that, I just want to say, woohoo! Maybe we have a solution to preserving something that the thought that we're standing here, am I the only one that it sort of gives goosebumps to think we're standing here where Union and Confederate troops, the Union troops were here, Confederates and Union are moving up and down the valley. They were on, when you mentioned the pickets up on, that's just one of those cold chill bumps.
When there is a trench line that runs from past the ferry all the way to the far side of the interstate now, since I've lived out here 22 years, I've watched houses be built on a lot of that trench line. That's all these houses down past the marina are on top of trench lines. That's one of those ways, though, we were able, Jim Ogden and 9 others were able to convince the trustees, the houses are coming for the ferry, you better do something soon. And eventually they did.
So let's have some questions. Before we do, though, I do want to say a special thank you to someone who is in the audience. We have a lot of incredibly important people here, but Representative Hazelwood drove back from Nashville. The Tennessee state government is involved in this project. She was in Nashville all day in meetings, and she drove moderately rapidly.
In fact, I'll say one thing in praise of the state of Tennessee and preservation. Now, Ms. Hazelwood probably had something to do with this, but I'm going to give a lot of the credit to our friend Steve McDaniel. When real estate is transferred now in Tennessee, once the tax reaches a certain level, a percentage of that tax goes to buy places like Browns Ferry and Browns Tavern. That has given Tennessee an edge up on any other state. It used to be Jim Ogden and 9 others who are interested in saving things would have to call the trust and beg. Now with that state money available, the trust calls us. So the legislature deserves a lot of kudos for what they've done.
We're very seldom ever do a historical event in this county that Representative Hazelwood is not there. She's one of our strongest supporters, and so you need to remember that. Headquarters. This Saturday we will be at Dallas, but that's going to be a very quiet ceremony because unfortunately the county seat is underwater. So we're just going to float a wreath out and say, second county seat, hello. And then we'll end up, if you'll check our Facebook page, Happy 200th Birthday Hamilton County, we post all of the events on it.
Union Fruit Landing Ferry, that's the pontoon bridge that lands the ferry, that's Grant and Thomas crossing the pontoon bridge down the ferry. This is the guy who
Chattanooga side.
Is
that the Chattanooga side?
Yes, this is Chattanooga side here.
Because I don't see the creek anywhere.
Well, the creek, Lookout Creek's way down here.
No, I'm at the
That little drainage creek would be right out here. In fact, this, you know where that...
on that property.
Okay. Well, we need to talk to you. You know where that little lip is, where the drainage creek is? That's where